The agenda, I'm going to talk about FT8, the flow, some of the WSJT essentials, focus on Foxhound, some of the extra helper applications that I find helpful. You guys make sure to share, this is sort of an FT8 perspective from my worldview, and I'm sure everybody else has got their their ways that help them get into the logbook. So let's talk about just the normal stream of events. I can't tell you how many folks that I've worked today, probably 3 or 4, that essentially are sending me Roger, Roger, Roger. And so if you take a look at this entire sequence from, say, a VP8 PJ calling a CQ, N7QT answers with his grid square, and I've labeled it even odd so you can see the cycle. VP8 PJ answers with a -10. I come back, hey, Roger 01, right? Simplex mode. But then VP8 sends a Roger, Roger. So that's an extra 15 seconds that really doesn't need to be there. And then we end up with Roger, 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 Roger. VP8 PJ ends on an even cycle. So the next cycle is an odd cycle. VP8 PJ can't do anything until the next even. So in essence, 2 minutes go by. So a streamlined event, we can sort of simplify this a little bit, where I, instead of sending the Roger, Roger, will send a Roger, Roger 7-3. But we've still only cut this down to about 1 minute and 45 seconds. So it's better with the Roger 7-3, but we still can do even better yet. We have a smart guy, N7GCO, who shows up. And what happens is, on the previous odd cycle where VP8 PJ has sent a 7-3 to N7QT has sent a Roger, Roger 7-3 to VP8 PJ, Mel sneaks in his call, right? And Mel essentially, hang on here, let me move this so I can see the entire screen. So Mel essentially slips in, instead of his grid square, he slips in a signal report. So what happens after that is VP8 PJ gets both of these on that odd cycle and replies with a Roger -10 to Mel. Mel replies Roger, Roger 7-3. VP8 PJ ends up with a 7-3. Total time is about 1 minute. So I am advocating for most of you not to send the grid square. And there's several reasons for it. There are exceptions. For example, when I'm in Arizona, I'm not at my FCC defined location. It would make sense for me to say that I'm in Arizona. But for example, on applications such as JT Alert that essentially look up where I'm at, most of the logging programs know that I'm in Washington. JT Alert will display I'm in Washington, knows my Washington grid square, and hence it would be much faster, especially if it's a DX station calling, to just send the signal report, because really the DX station does not care about your grid square. So one of the things in WSJT that you can do to disable sending grid square when you reply to a station is double clicking on TX1. It disables sending grid square and immediately goes into the TX2, which is the signal report. And so that's what I've enabled on my station, just to speed up the QSOs. Now, if you're on, a slow Sunday drive and you wish to send grid square, no big deal. But I think we can speed things up quite a bit by actually just sending the signal report without the grid square. And again, those that are still chasing grid squares, if I'm at my QTH, it will still log me at CN87. And if honestly, if I'm in a different location. Very often what I'm finding is when I sync up with LOTW, it will say, well, this guy really isn't in CN87 XQ, it's in RQ, and it updates my log appropriately through LOTW. So LOTW, when it finally does sync up, will correct any mismatches that there are there. The second thing I wanted to point out was it really bothered me on this latest version of WSJT where I sort of missed sending custom messages. And just recently, it occurred to me that TX5, you can basically overwrite some of the standard macros and put in your custom message. So this was just something I wanted to share with the group that I just recently discovered was custom messages. I knew about custom messages before, but they moved it into the TX5 macro where the standard macros are, and you can just overwrite that. So anyway, that was something that I wanted to share with the group. The other thing that is very, very evident is that there are so many people that still are operating without synchronizing to internet time. This is a snapshot that I just did last night. And take a look at all of these people, like, for example, this call, minus almost 0.6 of a second off. You've got this guy here that's a second off. And with all of our stations that are, pretty much always connected to the internet, there really is no reason for this. My delta time across the board is usually between 0 and 0.1. And what I see here are there's just a lot of guys that either are not running and syncing up to the NNTP server often enough, and hence we get all of these different values. And it becomes even more of a problem if you are DX. For example, I think Murph, there was a case earlier where we sent mail back and forth between each other where the DX station was almost 1 second to 2 seconds off, and we were having a very difficult time working him. So long story short, sync often. I have my station syncing every 15 minutes. I use Mindberg, but there's Dimension 4. There's so many other time servers out there. And the other thing I wanted to share with you as to why I believe this is really nonsensical that we still are not syncing is look at this device that is phenomenal. It's 22 bucks on either eBay or Amazon. The beauty of this one GPS, which I use, is the fact that it handles both our GPS satellites as well as the Russian GLONASS satellites concurrently. So I've plugged this into my station here on my counter, and I'm able to sync up to about 12 satellites in a 2-story building. So when we go out on expeditions, to Alaska, Kiska Island, this is what we use, and it works super well. I'm sure there are others. I'm not trying to sell this particular model, but there's really no reason why even here at home, I couldn't plug this into my PC and sync up. This is the other software I use. It's called NmeaTime by visualgps.com. It's 25 bucks. And basically it starts up as a Windows service and runs all the time. And so on my PC in the shack with my GPS on the side, it's really not needed because I've got access to the internet from my shack. But take a look at the what I've circled down at the bottom for the estimated time error. It's like 0.2 milliseconds, insignificant in terms of the errors, and it tries to get it close to 0. And this software does. So I've always got accurate time in the shack. I've always got accurate time for field day because of the fact that we've got these GPSs that are running. 22 bucks. I think this software was about 25, and it just works like a charm. So I wanted to share that with you for those that are going out in the field. Another thing that I found very, very helpful This relates back to one of the de-expeditions that I tried to work earlier this year. They were almost 2.5 seconds off. And I discovered this program called TimeFudge by W9MDB. You can look him up on QRZ. He's got a lot of little helper apps that are just great. And this is one of them. So how TimeFudge works, I think you guys can see it here in the presentation. It says TimeFudge version 1.4. What I did for this slide, if you look carefully, is that I have, I basically fudged my time by 1 second. So take a look over here at the start of this. I can't find my, oh, I'm sorry, hang on, let's go back. Let me expand this a bit. So you guys see my mouse at the very start of this trace. The delta times are 0.1, 0.6, 0.2, 0.1, right? I'm pretty accurate. The majority of people are 0.1s, 0.2s. There's some that are off. But look at what happened once I pressed fudge. I entered 1 second. You can enter fractions of a second. I clicked on fudge. And what it did is it said my total time got shifted by 1 second. And now look what happens down here, where all of a sudden, everybody's 1.0, 1.2. So I basically fudged my PC clock so I can match the DX station. And that's the beauty of this operation. It has the ability to do a control click, and it will reverse it. Instead of 1 second, it'll go to -1 in case you've got the directions wrong. And then I think you can do an alt click on this fudge button, and it will reset it back to 0 instantaneously. So the advantage of this program is you can fudge your time for a short, to make 1 QSO, and then bring it back in normal, back to internet time quite easily. So this program is, to me, essential in my toolkit. Now, the other thing that was important, it was very evident, this was another problem for some folks during this, some of the slides that you will see coming up. But very often, a station running as a Fox is so busy having conversations with all of the hounds that he doesn't send a CQ very often. So therefore, trying to find a place where you can click to fill in all of the standard messages is sometimes difficult. The easiest way to do that is basically enter the DX call sign here, generate standard messages, and something that should be very apparent and very easy to do, folks sometimes mess up. So what happened in the latest expedition, we saw it in South Orkney, guys sometimes mess up the call. And instead of say, VP8 PJ, they put in VP8 JP. They generate standard messages, they call, the DX station will never see them. So it's super important to get the call right. Something as simple as that, you'll be surprised at the number of people that don't get this right. So very important functionality, just make sure you pay attention. And this last expedition, indeed, there were 2 people that we had to contact to say, you got the wrong call sign. So the other feature, it's happened this year to one of our members, where very often you're working in Foxhound mode and you never receive the Roger 73. So what happens is, in most cases, like myself, I don't log the station because I'm not sure he got me. So I start all over again. There are some friends of mine that actually log it, but I personally don't log if I don't get a Roger 73. There was one expedition that happened last year where all of a sudden I checked, and I think I was on 40 meters. I never got the Roger 73, but I show up in the guy's log. So then I'm thinking, well, What time did I work them? I know it was 40 meters, but I'm not sure. The one thing that all of you should be aware of is the all.txt file that is generated by WSJT. And it basically stores everything that got decoded that you see through the monitor process. And so it occurred to me that one of the simplest ways of finding that missing QSO was to enter his call sign, my call sign, and I searched the entire database for that. And in this example, I'm just using WA7CPA N7QT, and I'm looking for when I had that contact with WA7CPA. And then I found it. I then can go over and take a look at the date, time, the frequency, and then enter it if I need to. So in my case, the WA7 was not the DX station, but I wanted to use this as an example for all of you in case you need to find a QSO that you didn't log. And very often you won't get that Roger 73. So if you do show up in the log, this is one method of going back to find your missing QSO so you can enter it, right? Fairly simple. I want to, talk about Foxhound in depth. That was one of the things that you guys were really, really interested in. This should be very evident to most of you, but you enter Foxhound, obviously, by going into File Settings, and you essentially click Special Operating Activity. You're more than likely the Hound, and then say OK. All right. What I wanted to do was let's talk about Foxhound and what it means. This is just an image that I grabbed of the waterfall. It's not anything in particular. It's probably, the standard operating frequencies, but we'll pretend this is a Foxhound operation that we're trying to work. One of the most important things to think about or to be aware of is the Hound basically owns frequencies from 1,000 hertz on down. Okay? That's their space, and you basically, unless you are called, you stay out of it. One of the very, very classic things that happen to us is folks park on 1,000. And they start sending. What we see, depending on their radios, our radios, the time of day, the temperature, they will show up on the Fox transceiver. Instead of 1,000, they'll show up at 995. And what happens in WSJT is there is no way that the Fox can add you into the queue in that scenario. So I tell everyone, do not go below, say, 1,100. Stay above 1,000, even though WSJT lets you stay away from 1,000, go further up. The other thing to be very, very aware of in this scenario is you guys see it on your transceivers. I see it on mine. But there are passband issues very close to the band edge. So let's say for the standard frequency on 20 meters, 14.074, as you approach 500, there's degradations of signals at that point. So one of the things as a Hound is to move your VFO down a couple hundred hertz so that the Fox shows up at about 600 or 700. Because a lot of times, one of the defaults in WSJT as a Fox is I can go down to about 300 hertz and operate as the Fox down there. But as you will see in the coming presentations, you will see degradations on the transceiver that was used. So my advice to all of you as Hounds, if the Fox is too close to 500, 400, 300, move your VFO down to move them up. But what that also means is you can no longer be at 1100. You've got to move a little further up because your VFO now is 200 hertz down. So just keep that in mind. Band edges are a real problem. To that extent, what we do here in the setup for Foxhound, always make sure you have one of these selected, whether it's, I didn't mean to circle the packet data. It's important as well, but really what I wanted to circle was rig or fake it. Because what that does is when you transmit, it puts essentially your VFO in a sweet spot so that the transceiver isn't going to have a problem trying to transmit near the band edge. So it's very important to use rig or fake it in these operations. Remember, this is just on transmit. You still will have problems on receive very close to the band edge. All right? So again, move your VFO slightly down to get the Fox at about 500. I definitely would not go above, say, 650, because what happens is the Fox has the ability to handle up to 5 different streams concurrently. Each of the streams are 60 hertz wide, right? So you take 5 times 60, right? And you've got a bandwidth that the Fox will use. So you want to make sure you keep it below 1,000. So again, 600, 700, I wouldn't go more than 650 on your side. Okay, so here's a trace that I was provided to me. And I want to sort of go through this. I don't have all my presentation notes because I don't have a dual monitor, but I will try and go off of memory. But what is interesting here and what I wanted to share with you all was this is the Fox view of FT8. What happens here is that when calls come in, I don't know if you can see this, but all the Foxes, all the Hounds that are calling the Fox get displayed in the top left pane. You don't see any at this point because there weren't any. What the Fox does at this point is double click on any of the calls that they want entered into the queue, and the calls get moved down into this bottom region here. I don't know if you guys can see the mouse, but Oscar Hotel 8 Alpha Victor is in the queue to be processed next. So the Fox basically goes to the top left window pane, double clicks, they get moved down into the queue. And at this point, let's take a look a little bit at what is being displayed down here. In this case, the Fox is running 5 streams because you see the N slots is set to 5. Hopefully you guys can see that. And the queue list is set to 12. So there could be up to 12 entries in the queue. And that is what is important on this screen. Let's just maybe review a little bit as to what's going on. Can you guys see this okay, or is it too small?
No, we can see fine, Rob.
You can see fine. Okay. So in this case, what happens here is that the Fox has basically called on these 3 stations and sent them the signal report, which is TX2. 3 of these stations have replied with a Roger. And then following that, the Fox is basically then acknowledging, say, this station, DD0VU. He had sent the Fox a Roger 02. The Fox replies to DD0VU and says, Roger, Roger 73. But at the same time, the Fox is also sending a signal report to NK2OW. And these are the 5 separate streams that the Fox is using. And you can see the Fox is using 400, 460, 520, 580, as well as 640. And those are the 5 streams, but in each of the streams, there can be multiple QSOs happening in that, all right? So that is essentially the view for the Fox. Now, remember I talked about the band edge. Take a look at this. Look at this transceiver. This is the Fox's transceiver. Look at the band edge. So basically anything below 500 is problematic. And so what the Fox should do at this point is the Fox should basically move his operating position, his transmit frequency from 400 up to about 600 to clear this band edge. Because anyone that is down in that noise, the Fox is going to have a hard time copying. So I wanted to play this little video that was provided to me of the operation. I'll speak to it because there's no words to it, but remember I talked about the callers being in the top left pane. You saw a bunch of calls in the top left pane right there. There's a bunch of people calling the Fox. So what's going to happen is the Fox double clicks on each of these and puts them in the queue. Now they're in the queue, and what's going to happen here is they get processed, and we'll just watch this. So EA8AUW is next to be processed, and as soon as the Fox sends a Roger 73 to someone, then it moves all of those guys at the same time into this 5 streams that are set. And they now, all 5 of those guys will see themselves being called. So does that make sense? It's sort of like that's how things are processed. And in this case, I'll stop this video. I want to show you guys something. In this case, F4HAB has replied with a Roger 17. Okay. Look at this one station here. Do you see him? R1BEE. He is actually on the transmit frequency of the Fox, and he is sending a grid square. So this is the working frequency of the Fox, and yet you have a station basically sending his grid square to the Fox, and the Fox will never, ever, ever be able to pick this guy up. So this is, again, some of the things that we see on our end. And I'll just continue with this. I think you guys get the drift. So right now, the Fox has sent out the request, transmitting, and then it waits essentially for the reply. In the meantime, more people have been queued up. And then they get added into this. And in the meantime, you see that the Fox has now already handled 2 or 3 of the guys that were already processed through the queue. All right. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to show on this this slide. Any questions? No? All right.
Yeah, I got one real quick, Robert.
Yeah, go ahead, Murph.
On the queue list that you start on the left-hand side, the list of those people.
Right.
Are those listed as in signal strength or as decoded first, second, third?
So
here's my question. Here's my question to you.
Okay.
How do I get to be first on that list?
It's going to be difficult, Murph, for you to get to know how the list is processed. I can tell you, if you are working me, chances are pretty good I'm going to sort it by distance. So I want to work the furthest guy away from me that I possibly can, because that's the DX, and that more than likely is going to be the gray line.
Okay.
Now, I'll put a caveat on that. If that station is a -25 or a -24, I might be looking for signals that are, say, -18 or above. So signal strength does play into it. The default for WSJT is signal strength, right? And what gets decoded first. And so the guys at the top of the list are typically the guys that are cleanest signal, great delta times, very low values, and big signals like yours, okay? But it can be sorted by many different ways. Now, in this screen that you're looking at here, see how the sort is? This is being sorted by signal to noise. So in this case, the strongest guys will pop up. All right, but this can be, if you go into WSJT, you make yourself a Fox, you will be able to see all the possibilities for sorting. My preference is distance because I want DX. Here is the good, the bad, and the ugly. These are the kinds of things I see. Look at this guy's signal. Like, it's supposed to be 50 hertz. And why does it look like that? So one of the things as you guys try to work DX or are on FT8 and including your friends is tell them how they look, right? In a polite, politically correct way. But if you see signals like this, it's problematic because he's wiping out a bunch of people, okay? So these are examples of the things I see. And notice he's very close to 1,000. It's problematic. Here's another one that a lot of people do not know. So let's analyze this one individual here. I think, let me see if I can find it. KOUA. KOUA was picked up here at the top. Can you see where my mouse is? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
So K0UA replied to the DX station with a Roger 21. The Fox replied back to K0UA with a Roger 73. Okay. And this was not the first time that K0UA was given a Roger 73. There were multiple times ahead of that he was given a Roger 73. So as far as the Fox is concerned, K0UA is done. He's in the log. The Fox has moved on. Okay? But look what happens down here. K0UA never picked up the Roger 73. He continues to call and call and call and call because it's rare DX. He wants to get in the log, but the Fox has already moved on and will never be able to acknowledge the Roger. I have essentially filed a bug with the WSJT team. They basically say it's not a bug. And my contention is the clients, once they are pulled down into the Fox's working area, should stop transmitting after so many cycles. Because what happens very, very often is everybody's excited to work that rare one and keep thinking by sending Rogers and signal reports to the Fox that they have the ability to work the Fox, or the Fox has the ability to log them at this point. It's over. So the best thing for all of you guys is that if you do not receive the Roger 74 or 73 in, say, 3 or 4 cycles, start over again. And the only problem that's happening here is these guys are staying, they're stuck gumming up the rest of the streams that are using this space. So every time he transmits and there's another Hound that the Fox is sending info to on the specific working frequency, it's getting gummed up by the guys that are still sending their Rogers. Hopefully that's clear. Don't do it. It's a limited time. Again, I pointed this out. Here is a station that is on top of the Fox sending grid square information. Now, one thing I want to say are there are multiple applications able to deal with Foxhound and FT8. And this is a point that I want to make to most of you, all of you, is that, for example, I am aware of a program called MSHV that can handle Foxhound and simplex concurrently. What does that mean? That means MSHV, if the Fox uses that program, will be able to handle folks running FT8 simplex as well as FT8 Foxhound. It doesn't care. But WSJT cares. So you should always, always use Foxhound if the station is running Fox, if the Fox is running Foxhound, and you have no idea what application he is using, right? So let's talk about this. WSJT, there are a ton of programs. And there's Murph. I see a smile on his face. He knows what I'm talking about. But these are the applications that I have used. They all have merit. WSJT is essentially the gold standard. That's what most of us de-expeditioners use. Murph showed me, asked me to try out WSJT-Z, and he drew my attention because it was crack. And so I gave it a shot. It is actually a very good program, very powerful. Again, MSHV handles both Foxhound and simplex, which is why I think it continues to propagate bad behavior, because it handles folks that can do simplex as well. Whereas WSJT won't deal with simplex users in Foxhound mode. JTDX, I really enjoyed it. I had a decode at Roger -26. It was unbelievable, and I don't see that with WSJT. WSJT, I get about a -24, but JTDX is a great decoder. Now, for the few of the 1%ers in this group who have great stations, like my dear friend Mel, who has diversity antenna, there is a program written by, I think his name's it's IZTOK, I believe is the spelling. He's S52 Delta. And he essentially has done diversity receive correctly, in the sense that his program, you essentially instantiate two instances of WSJTX. One listens to the left channel, the other one listens to the right channel. And they talk to each other. And then in whichever is the main channel, it aggregates everything decoded by both decoders, which are using two different receivers, which are using two different antennas. It does about 10 to 15% more decodes than just running any of these applications by itself. Extremely powerful. I've used it, incredible for that rare DX. For example, the new 3Y operation that's going to happen. Due to their location, they're going to be extremely weak. This might be a good implementation for you guys who have receive antennas and diversity mode stations to be able to implement. Again, I talked about little helper functions that I absolutely think is essential. I use these four religiously: JT Alert X, TimeFudge, which I talked about earlier, PSK Reporter, and hamspots.net. JT Alert X, why do I like it? It essentially does auto logging to most logging programs. I use DX Keeper as my logging program, and JT Alert X writes directly into DX Keeper when it sees the Roger 7.3. The other thing that I really, really like JT Alert X for is that it scans the logs and it generates alerts. If it sees that you do not have a country or CQ zone or an ITU zone, it basically will bark at you. I hear DX all day long, and I go running into my shack to find out what am I missing. For you guys chasing states, it's a very, very nice way of being alerted to states that you need. Okay. It uploads to ham spots and PSK Reporter if you so set it up to do that. And one of the best features of all is text messaging. I got texted yesterday by a ham that I have known for many years. I met him 3 years ago in Visalia, 3 or 4. And he sat next to me and he basically says, Rob, I've got a new radio. And he's using the JT Alert texting. And he goes, I've got a new radio. How does my signal look like? Right? Am I splattering? And basically he was a +1 at this end. And yet his signal looked great, 50 hertz wide, strong, solid. And that was, you know, pretty amazing. The other thing that JT Alert does, as you can see down here, is it says, for example, Delta Victor 3 Charlie Echo Papa. It says on this G code, we've already worked them before. You don't need to worry about it, right? The guys in green, I've never worked, right? So this is a really, really cool way, especially for FT8, where it's a catch and release, meaning you work the guy once, you never work him again. This is another benefit, JT Alert. Again, here's a text messaging feature. This is the guy yesterday that was chatting with, and we had a great conversation while we're doing FT8, okay? Another feature of JT Alert. Again, this is the log scanning. We talked about that earlier. This is the newer version of JT Alert X. Just a great app. This is another website that I use a lot, and that's hamspots.net. Take a look on the left-hand side, this upper left pane. There's guys that are talking. There's a ton of guys that like, hey man, I need, you know, Delaware, where are you guys, right? And so there's a lot of chatter that's going on. Down in the bottom left, it shows the calls that you spotted, as well as where you're being spotted, okay? So it's really important. You can see the countries that are on the air. So in case there's something you need, it's available. Let's talk about etiquette. And this is sort of wrapping it up for me of things that we should really try to do well. I cannot tell you, I operated probably for about 3 hours today. Several guys were on top of my frequency. They would move to answer my CQ and they stayed. And so these are the kinds of things that we should be diligent about, share, communicate, be Elmers to everybody else. You know how on CW and SSB you get on the air, you go, hey, is anybody using this frequency, right? Is this frequency clear? We should do the same thing. Most of us should do the same thing in FT8. So before you start transmitting, go find an open spot, right? And wait at least 2 cycles to see in the odd and the even to see that really there's no one there. Because you might have caught, you know, the station trying to, you know, making a call and then waiting for a response. The other thing that we should try to do more often is if you're calling CQ and nobody answers you for a while, go take a look at PSK Reporter or ham spots, figure out where you're being heard, right? Or it could be that somebody's just right on top of you, transmitting on top of you, and especially if you're running lower power, you're not going to be heard. In 99% of all of my transmissions, I've got that hold TX frequency set. I find an open spot, I never move, okay? This is one of the major reasons why folks jump on top of you when they answer your call and then take over your frequency because they've forgotten that they've moved on top of you, right? Probably one of the most important things that I see as a Fox is very often folks are calling, but they can't hear me. And so I repeat and I repeat and I repeat and never work them, but they just keep coming. So if you can't decode the station, don't bother calling them at all. Power adjustments. Again, this is the value of PSK Reporter, where you can see where you're being heard. If you are plus 0 something, turn your power down, right? If you're working a guy and he's a DX station, he's less than minus 20, turn it up, right? Because you want to work that station. So use these, adjust your power according to conditions. What was the last one here? If you're a Hound and has been called by the Fox, okay, this is the stop transmitting your Roger 7-3 for more than 4 times, because basically the Fox has moved on. All right, so we talked about that earlier. There's a lot of questions that I get as to how do you determine if the station is running Fox or Hound. My sort of 2 cents in this matter is that if the station is not calling in the standard frequencies, chances are extremely good that they're running Foxhound, and you should switch. Okay. Again, if you see a reply from that Fox station with multiple responses in a stream, they're also in Foxhound, right? Again, the audio levels, I showed you the one guy that was just splattering everywhere. These are some of the things that you check. For example, on the K3, they recommend 3 or 4 bars of ALC. And that's what I've set my K3 to. There are other transceivers that basically say you should see no ALC action. So the other possibility is also to have a buddy check for your modulation if you sound or if you look good and you're relatively narrow. Again, this was my point about MSHV, where the Fox handles both Simplex and Foxhound concurrently. WSJT does not. Therefore, assume the least common denominator. If he's in Foxhound, you be in Foxhound as well. And that's done it for my presentation. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you've got any questions, again, these are sort of my takeaways from being both a Fox and a Hound. And so anyway, this is my next QTH in February. I'll let you guess where it is. My next Fox operation in February.